Bom dia, boa tarde, bonjour à tous.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon.
Bonjour à tous, soyez les très bienvenus.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone.
D'ouvrir cette nouvelle conférence.
I'm really happy to open this new conference
Je suis Benoît
in the scope of our IIP Talks series. I'm Benoît Le Bouteiller, and I'm speaking from Brazil. This moment, I am near the wonderful city of Belo Horizonte, and I will describe myself quickly, so that for you who are here and have sight disabilities. I'm a cis man, have fair skin, white skin, short hair. My beard is more white than black. I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt, and behind me you have a picture on the wall with a small picture of Freud. There are some books on the shelf behind me. I'm a psychoanalyst of the International Institute of Psychoanalysis, which is a community present in different areas of the globe. We propose a training course for you, and I'd like to tell you that we have our subscriptions open for our next group that starts in September with a team of teachers, a wonderful team of teachers. You will see on the chat the list of the teachers. I will speak quickly about our teacher today, Thamy.
Qui travaillent avec nous au quotidien au sein de l'IIP, qui nous permettent
We have also professional interpreters who are with us. They work very frequently with us in the activities of IIP, allowing our courses to be interpreted simultaneously in Portuguese, English, French, and Brazilian Sign Language, Libras. I would like to thank also Gabo and Dorothé. They are our executive assistants. I'd like to thank them with a very warm heart, because I know that without them, it wouldn't be possible for IIP to perform their activities. We wouldn't be able to have our institute without this wonderful team. Now I'm going to hand the floor to our dear Yara. How are you, Yara?
Hi, Benoît. Thank you very much. I'm doing well. I'll also describe myself shortly. I'm a cis woman. I'm talking from Berlin, Germany. I'm wearing a colorful shirt. Behind me, there's a bookshelf, a white wall, a heater, because we are in Germany, although it's summer right now here. And yes, welcome everybody. And we are today in the webinar mode of Zoom. So you can ask your questions using the Q&A tool. It's like below on the Zoom bar. And you can write them in English, in Portuguese, or in French. If you prefer to ask or comment orally, you can raise your hand and we will give you permission to open up the microphone and the camera. Also possible in Portuguese Sign Language. Okay, so thank you very much for being here today with us.
Merci beaucoup, Yara. On te retrouve du coup.
Thank you very much, Yara.
Yes.
We're going to see each other again after Thamy's presentation. We are going to have a session for discussions and questions. Thamy, welcome
de l'Institut international de psychanalyse. Au sein de cette
You are
formation,
one of the professors of our psychoanalysis training. You worked since the first year of this training. In this class, this course will last for 1 year, and you will share it with other
professeur à l'université de Ottawa qui travaille beaucoup sur les questions
we have our professor from the University of Ottawa in Canada. He works a lot with all different matters regarding elderly age and disabilities. We are happy to know that you are here with us today. You're going to be presenting your content to us. But before that, I would like to know, Thamy, if you can complete your presentation quickly, the presentation that I already started about you. I would like you to finish your introduction, some elements of psychoanalysis in your life as well. If you could share it with us, it would be great. Also, if you want to describe yourself for people who have sight disabilities. Also, I would like to greet everyone who is coming into this room now. There are people coming from different parts of the world, people from the Philippines, people from Europe. I see here Portugal, France, Germany, Turkey. We are very happy with the presence of so many people from different places. We would like to welcome you all. And to me, I'm really happy to hand the floor to you now. I would like to remind you that you are polyglot. You speak countless languages, and today you will speak in Portuguese with us. I feel quite honored and flattered to be invited by you. It was a very interesting experience to give classes at IIP. I hope this conference will be a moment of exchange between us. Well, let me describe myself. I'm a cis man, although I'm not binary. I'm from Morocco and France, and I'm very Brazilian in my heart. What else can I say? My hair is black. I'm wearing a white and blue shirt with the flag of Argentina. What else can I say? I'm in my office now. It is the office that I assist the patients. There are books and plants behind me. And let's see if it will help you get more inspired. Just a few words as you asked me, Benoît, to talk about my relationship with psychoanalysis. I graduated, first of all, in philosophy and English literature, and then psychology, and then psychoanalysis. Just to summary everything, I would say that my research has been of the relationships between psychoanalysis and the externalities, the psychoanalytic discourse, the clinical practice, and other forms of discourse. And especially in the past 15, 20 years, I've studied the psychic effects of discriminations, gender discriminations, sexuality discrimination, ethnicity, and socio-economical class, so that psychoanalysis can keep thinking of its position in contemporary times, especially with the changes in clinic and history. The target of this lecture. I call it "The Personal is Political." The goal is to highlight the political dimension of psychoanalysis and how just taking this position in the political aspect, it seems that is a theoretical and clinical approach to open to contemporary questions or issues. So I'm going to highlight this political position. I'm going to make it more clear of what I understand when I say the personal is political, and to discuss about different topics of politics. The personal is politic, the clinical is politic, the theoretical is politic, and the epistemologic is political. So these will be the different topics in my presentation. And then I will speak precisely of the consequences of psychoanalysis in terms of dialogues against the different type of discourses, what I call hybridization of psychoanalysis and with other discourses. And then I will conclude what I call the minor psychoanalysis.
So, please don't hesitate to interrupt me if there's something that needs to be clarified. So let's politicize. The personal is political. This phrase comes from what is called the second wave of feminism. Even though I don't believe there are several waves, I believe it's more like an ocean where there are several waves and ups and downs, but they were identified in a more orthodox way, three waves of feminism. The first one was that from the claiming of equal rights within an accepted system, and then it went to contesting the system itself. So it wasn't just about making men and women having the same rights between a given system, but then questioning the actual system, including attacked, because it was this system that generated inequality and the differences between rights. So this second wave was about dislocating the gaze from the divided parts as two divided classes, men and women, to the principle itself of division that produces these two classes. And the key of the system is the patriarchy, which is based on the appropriation of bodies and the domestic work of women by men, a system that divides the sexes into antagonistic classes. So this is to say the personal is political is a way of emphasizing the political issues that are traditionally considered private, like contraception, abortion, sexuality, marriage. So the private is political, and it is essentially social, and it is inscribed in the political and power relationships in which it is found. So the modes of being of subjects are inscribed in political modes. So these coordinates can be transformed. The modes of subjectification are not eternal. They're not ontologically essential. It depends on the context, which is a political context. So in a certain way, this is one of the things that Lacan pointed to when he wrote that the unconscious is politics. And what I understand by political here is the management of power relationships and social organizations. So it's a very broad meaning of politics. It's not just, it doesn't have to do with just government and state. And psychoanalysis to me, being political, it means that that the position that in terms of neutrality and analytical purity, it refuses the political, because it says that we in our offices, we only look at subjective realities. The political has to be outside the office, based on a neutral position, without affect. This position that refuses politics, it is political. It is a political choice, precisely. It is a choice of games of power and of order and conservation versus change and creative innovation. So if the person is so if the person is political, all my reflections come from my clinic, and also I reflect on the exile. And there have been several analysts who have told me that they have consulted analysts or psychologists who have gone to great lengths to analyze that which was caused their homosexuality or their sexual identity, in quotes, and how it had deviated. This curious theoretical, clinical, and counter-transference hostility it constitutes a supposedly analytical type of discourse which intends to take these people down the right path. So homophobia, transphobia, sexism, if it's not totally personal or ideological, they are structural, especially based on classification. The classification of sexualities with heterosexuality on top, and then the other sexualities classified below. This is a part of a way of structural homophobia. In the same way, the classification of gender identities, giving priority to cis identity or cis centrality, it is transphobic in a structural way. And racism, it might not be personal. The analyst might not be personally racist. However, when the analyst imposes the centrality of whiteness, then you have a structural racism installed. So over a multi-year practice, I think that dealing with this clinical practice, it requires a certain flexibility. It requires personalizing the clinical approach. You need to develop your own style. And it took me a long time that I've been working as an analyst, but it took me a long time to find my style and walking away from a very orthodox vision that is the type of cure therapy and focusing on transference, which I consider something that happens in the crossroads of social power relationships, gender, class, race, age, ableism, etc. So transference for me is a political space. It repeats social power relationships. So here we need to analyze within this relationship that is asymmetrical. The analytical relationship is not an equal relationship among friends. It's asymmetrical with the subject supposed to know and the analysand. However, the target is to make this asymmetrical relationship that it does not turn into a power relationship so that you do not have power abuse, because that's it's very common to happen within social power relationships. The clinical is political, but also the theoretical is political. And this is something We have abundant psychoanalytical literature about gender diversity, sexual diversity, sexuation that are not heterocentered, with the target of condemning this. And I was very interested in that which I call malpractice, clinical malpractice or diagnostic insult. And it has to do with the apprehension of gay, lesbian, trans people based on predefined diagnosis, which deprive these people of their symbolic capacity and require a confession of their ignorance. And this approach has the function of producing the truth of their desires and their bodies without these subjects having the possibility of speaking for themselves. So this performative use of the diagnosis, which is I call the point blank diagnosis, it's a way of using the insulting categories of homophobia, transphobia, in a pseudo-analytical approach and perpetuating social order, social relationships of power, of gender and sexuality. And of course, this diagnostic insult can be rethought, deconstructed, turned inside out, because if you have an insult, you can turn this insult inside out. Historically, the story of offensive terms, for example, in English, for example, faggot, cunt, bitch, queer, they have been reappropriated and they have been claimed as a place of solidarity of a group. So this reappropriation can also happen via performances, interventions. I was thinking about a performance that happened by Saint-Bossier. It's called a zap. The objective of a zap is to highlight the politics of speech and silence. Who can talk, who cannot talk. It has to do with invading conferences, seminars. It has to do with preventing the speakers from talking. And I thought that the zap by Saint-Bossier was very interesting, because when the queer people invaded a seminar about trans identity, that which was called transsexualism, he was trying to describe the syndrome of CTLPHF, which is called the hetero fetishist, pre-feminist Lacanian countertransference, which is based on two main denials. The one is the foreclusion of Lacan's name and the refusal of the heterocentric militancy. So turning this inside out and producing in a humorous way diagnosis against psychoanalysts themselves, because some of them appear as irrational mystics, others as symptomatic psychotics. And I'm still citing Saint-Bossier here. They were making fun of the idea that there's only two sexes and they can only can be diagnosed as the foreclusion of Lacan's name of the father, which has the effect of integrating the confusion that Lacan makes between the phallus and his own dick. So the irreverence of the statement highlights the injurious dimension of these psychoanalytic diagnoses. So he's answering with the same type of insult. It also emphasizes the naturalization strategies of heterocentric sexuality and cisgender sexuation. And in the meantime, the diagnoses and the insult diagnoses continue with minorizations, taking things as the truth, gender violence in clinical practice over subjects that already suffer from gender violence in a predefined way of psychological development. So it's the development from the first drink from the breast of a baby to the missionary possession. So there are several insults of diagnosis of talking about heterosexuality, the difference between the sexes, the same thing about trans identity, even more violent and which excludes many other people. And what happens here is that descriptive analysis of the modalities of arranging sexualities and historically situated positions of these heterosexualities, these configurations that gave way to a historical moment to psychoanalytic classifications, this descriptive analysis of the sexes given historically, it becomes prescriptive, a unique way of prescription. So it becomes excluding of any diversity that is supposedly pathological here. And this is what we can also call alterization. There are several considerations of alterized individuals who are excluded in the psychoanalytic field when they refuse to take into account the racial power relationships and their psychological consequences. So the question is, how can psychoanalysis avoid perpetuating these structural racism, sexual structural racism, structural transphobia, etc.
So this is what I was meaning when it comes to theoretical and political. Now, the epistemological and political. I think that when we talk about the politicization of epistemology in a Foucaultian way, we can have a genealogy and archaeology of the knowledges and the conditions of the arising of the discourses of truth, the relationships of strength and subduing of knowledges. They favored for some knowledges, types of knowledge to come to be and others to be excluded. Epistemologically, we could say that we could take into account two epistemologies. First, the situated epistemology, the situated knowledge epistemology, the epistemology of positioning that intends to avoid that the psychoanalytical discourse has the tendency to be preaching a world of neutrality or supposed neutrality. In what regards the situation of the types of knowledge comes from two political traditions. The first one is the subordinate figure that is introduced by Gramsci, which refers to the person that experiences directly domination. For example, a worker in a factory. In a Marxist analysis of the 1950s, but that precisely for being in this situation of subordinity in the factory, they develop the expertise of exploration in the factory that becomes inaccessible to the bosses. So this position of marginalization allows an expertise on the domination relationships. And similarly, in terms of gender, women can observe in a privileged position the masculine domination that brings the foundation of the capitalist systems and reveals the work reproduction that is made invisible. So it is a Marxist tendency, but also Afro-feminist American visions, such as Bell Hooks, Angela Davis, Audre Lorde, and Patricia Hill Collins' works, who want to value the knowledge produced by the margins, the Black women, that reveals more profit in terms of the supposedly hegemonic knowledge. So it is in the limit, in the edges, in the borders or margins. So this position from the margins to the center seems to be very adequate when it comes to the analytical listening. So what is listened is not in the center, but also comes from the margins, from the peripheral areas. So to avoid what Sandra Harding and Donna Haraway called the point of view from upwards. It's a point of view that is not situated in a place, but it views everything, the sum of all points of view. It's impossible, obviously, but it characterizes as a paradox a knowledge that is not situated, that does not intend to say where it is coming from, where it is speaking from. So to avoid being reductionist or universalist, being based in a looking without being looked, as Donna Haraway would say, the position of man and white person. And also we could add heterosexual and cis and non-disabled and mid-class, etc. The epistemology of the positions, but also the epistemology of ignorance, which seems interesting. In a theorization developed by Charles Mills, an American philosopher, that is based in the Foucault production of knowledge. Charles Mills analyzes in 1997 what he calls racial contracts, to think and question all the philosophical tradition, the political philosophy of the social contract. He analyzes the racial contract, defining a set of agreements or meta-agreements, formal and informal, established among the members of a subgroup of humans named by race criteria as white or complete people. And these agreements allow them to classify the other groups, human groups, as sub-people in an inferior moral state and subordinate to the political groups managed by white men. So it has to do all races, including slavery that was established in the invasion of the Americas, but it has effects even after the independence of the countries and the slavery abolition in the countries, but it still has effects in the social structure of societies. The moral and legal rules that rule the behavior of white people in their relationships among themselves are not applied in the relationships with the non-white people. What emerges here is a political story of truth. It is an epistemology of ignorance, as Charles Mills states, an inverted epistemology that holds cognitive dysfunctions that are located and global. These dysfunctions, and I'm still mentioning Mills, the ironic result that the white people are not generally able to understand the world that they themselves created. It is a way of lack of consciousness of fascism as a structural racism and the inequality of the way of treating the others. So dysfunctions that are not accidental, but they are described by the terms of the social contract to keep a white hegemony. And this produces moral psychology that is racialized, and it produces what Charles Mills calls white ignorance, which operates as a constant refusal. The white subject is constituted as alienated, blind, by a whiteness that defines arbitrarily the relationships of power and has a segregation based in ignorance. And I'm going to give you an example that is very contemporary. And several people, organizations, they intend to struggle to fight with social and policies against racism in a point of view of color blindness. Thinking of this position of the French Republican universalism or racial democracy in Brazil. This position ends up perpetuating racism through this same process of ignorance. Because when I say I don't see color. If I say that, it's because I have the privilege to say that, because I do not suffer the consequences of structural racism. That is, this position makes the historical construction disappear, something that happened throughout centuries. The line, a color line that distinguishes white people, white subjects from other peoples, and it hinders the stabilization of the perspective of race and the white privilege. The color blindness ideology is an effective ignorance, is the cancellation of the race in history and the consequences in terms of social relationships in this history. And it keeps an unquestionable white hegemony. So it's important to think of this epistemology of ignorance in the analytical, theoretical, clinical stance, because it will produce transference effects of silencing and specific experiences in the name of universalism in the majority analytical literature. Well, clinically, we have this point of knowing that if there is or there is not here a specific form of silencing from the Freudian repression or the alienation of language that is based in these relationships of power. And the subordinate situation takes us to bring this point in the ethical and psychoanalytical and philosophical point of view, which is the point of who can speak on the divan. From what criteria of our listening? From which type of exclusion of the majority categories of representativeness? So the position of subordinates is not only repression, but it also the exclusion of the hegemonic grammar that does not allow the subordinates to speak from their own position. So this raises the point of how do we listen to people in our offices? From which grammar? And how can we precisely listen to this type of subordinate position? Dear Thamy, excuse me, I could listen to you until tomorrow with no problem, but it would be great for us to have some time for discussion, for the debate. Okay, I will finish now. What I would like to convey in this endless talk, I didn't calculate the adequate time to speak. All of this made me think of a hybridization of psychoanalysis. my central position is within this politicized psychoanalysis, the way for psychoanalysis to be psychoanalytic without being enclosed in a paranoid narcissism in the identity of itself, and to become hybrid with other discourses, the discourses of the gender discourses, the gay, queer, lesbian, trans, intersex, and feminist discourses, and also in the post-colonial studies, decolonial studies, and the critical studies of race and whiteness, hybridization that would allow to recover the identity as a criteria that is invisibilized in psychoanalysis. I think it is an imaginary capturing. The psychoanalysis does not have to be identical to itself, and the personality of the subject having the attention to the diagnosis, classifications that label and naturalize differences, and the identity of the analyst. It's a paradox, but for the person to exercise psychoanalysis, they need to avoid any kind of stuckness in identity.
So I will conclude by saying that this made me think of what I thought about better psychoanalysis, a minor psychoanalysis, better developed by Guattari and Deleuze. They talked about minor literature, and they gave the example of Kafka, minor literature that is not written in a minor language, but written in a major language, written by a minority. Kafka is from Czechoslovakia, a Jewish writer writing in German. So this minor literature allows us to deterritorialize the major language. And I aim at minor psychoanalysis that deterritorializes a major psychoanalysis, and that is overall a political issue that listens subjective voices, that listens to collective agencies of enunciation. Of course, this has consequences about analysis of transference. I could explain if you ask me about it. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Thamy. I propose that we now go to Berlin. So let's listen to Yara, who is in Berlin and who will intermediate our Q&A.
Yes, hello, Thamy. It's always such a pleasure to listen to you and to learn with you. I invite everybody to comment and write questions. In the meanwhile, Thamy, considering the strong presence of social media in our daily life, and also the change in society, like the latest change in society, what are the most relevant changes and the most relevant challenges you experienced in your clinic regarding what you said, side effects of discrimination, gender violence, and other relations of power?
Okay, so considering social media and social changes, you said?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, I do believe that
like the challenges and the change you have been observing in your practice.
Well, the one basic challenge is precisely that psychoanalysis can't remain some kind of secretive practice in a private practice that is not being spoken about between people in social media. And I think this democratization of psychoanalysis is very important too, because it also enables people to give their opinion about certain practices that before remained totally invisibilized. And one example of this, I'm going to give only this example to try and, well, this is what comes to my mind when you ask this question. It's the very practice of looking for a safe psychoanalyst. And you know that in many countries, you've got safe psychoanalysts or safe psychologist lists circulating with people asking for safe practitioners, safe analysts, safe psychologists. And I think this is very important because, well, lots of analysts did fight against it, saying that this is very imaginary and that, for instance, I don't know, you're gay, so you're looking for a gay analyst because you would think that a gay analyst would understand you better than a straight analyst. And this is some kind of imaginary captation. And then, yes, it might be quite imaginary on the one hand, but the very objective of the analysis of transference is moving from this first imaginary captation to an analysis of the symbolical relation that is being established there. And so I think that these safe analysts lists are very important because it's a way analysans can be empowered, and it's very important. It's a way analysans can have their voices listened to, and it's a way they do not submit without any kind of critique or without any kind of questioning to the very power of an omnipotent analyst, without questioning what they're going through, what they're yielding to. I think this is very important. I think this is really very important because it's also a way to try and think the power relation of this sujet supposé savoir, the subject supposedly knowing subject that the analyst is, whom doesn't have to turn directly into an effectively knowing subject or subject of knowledge. And I think that asking for a safe psychoanalyst is a way to say, as an analysant, I have my word about it. I can say something about it. I don't yield to it just because analysis is something magical that is supposed to free me from whatever, and that I'm going to submit totally to the other. So this is
okay. Thamy, we have not so much time, but it's a good way to give like a glance of what could come in our course, starting in September in the new course. I will put like the questions regarding the transference maybe together. So what is the importance of the transference and the counter-transference in this process? I mean, that would be maybe too hard to talk in a short time. It has to do with the difference between symbolic transference and imaginary transference. And also if you could talk a bit, because there is a comment just in the beginning, there was a comment in the chat that I would not put all whites in the same category, especially not the Eastern people who have had never anything to do with the Western colonialism. So maybe also talking about the homophobic countries. I mean, I think you could put all together, and in this minutes that we have before I pass also to Benoît to finish.
Okay, well, I'll start by your second question, whiteness. Whiteness is not a question of color of the skin. I mean, it doesn't rely only on that. Whiteness is just like race in general, it's relational. Race is not biological, race is not ontological. It's a relation, at least between two subjects or two groups. It's a relation based on history, based on colonization and the massacre of indigenous people, and obviously slavery, which defined, at least two or more than two groups hierarchized, one group being on the top, dominating and exploiting and obviously excluding the other groups. So race, when we speak about whiteness, whiteness is very something which depends on the context. I mean, somebody is not white absolutely. I mean, you could pass for a white woman, for instance, Yara, because you're a white Brazilian woman. In Brazil, you're considered white. But I don't think that in Germany, you'd be considered the same way. I mean, as white as you might be considered white in Brazil, in Brazil precisely. Because in Germany, you come from the global south. You're a woman who comes from the global south. And there is a whole history between the global north and the global south. So whiteness is not a question of the color of the skin. It's a question of where do we stand in today after this whole history, Western history of colonization, domination, slavery, and exploitation, etc. Where do we stand according to that? I mean, whiteness is the possibility, for instance, to circulate in the world. I have a European passport. For that reason, I'm white, but I'm not. I mean, in France, I'm not white, I'm Moroccan. But circulation-wise, I'm white. I have rights that other people cannot enjoy because they were born in another country, which doesn't give them the same privilege of circulation. So this is what I speak about when I speak about whiteness. So I think the question was about eastern zone of the world.
Yes, Thamy, was a comment. I was just rephrasing the comment. I totally agree with you, and I experience that every day here in Germany. There was a comment on the chat of our colleague. I'm not sure if he's from the Philippines, but yes. Anyways, could you talk a bit of the transference?
Transference. Well, Lacan spoke about transference in two ways. He said it's transference, and this is imaginary transference, it's the sum of the analyst's prejudice. That is to say, all their imaginary representations, all their prejudice, all their ideological, personal, etc., etc. The way they conceive of, let's say, in these matters, gender, race, sexuality, etc. So this is imaginary transference. And then there is symbolic transference. And symbolic transference is, in terms of Lacan, it's love addressed to knowledge. It's symbolic transference is when the analyst is considered as the supposedly knowing subject, and there is love addressed to this supposedly knowing subject. And precisely because it's a question of sujet supposé savoir, of knowledge, I do believe in a very Foucaultian way that this knowledge, and this knowledge granted to that supposedly knowing subject, is totally inscribed within social power relations. That is, I mean, in a Foucauldian perspective, there is no knowledge without power relations. And so this knowledge is totally distributed according to power relations. So when it comes to symbolic transference, my way of trying to think about it and deal with it is to try and see how knowingly and unknowingly, consciously and unconsciously, within this relationship that establishes in an analyst's practice, there might be the repetition of social power relationships, gender relationship, power relationships, sexuality power relationships, race power relationships. And this, which has never really been considered by orthodox psychoanalysis, is what, in my opinion, characterizes symbolic transference. That is to say, how does the relationship establish, according to which power relationships power exchanges does it define? And so this is why I really do believe that what I call minor psychoanalysis that would focus on symbolic transference this way is not a psychoanalysis about sexuality. It's not a psychoanalysis about sexual infantile, and it's psychoanalysis that deals with power and dominion relationships and the way they materialize precisely within the practice and within transference. This is what I think about it. I can give more precisions if you ask me to, but this is it for the moment.
Thank you so much, Thamy. I think, I hope that people like today will be very curious to get in touch with us and start the next course, the next formation. And I also would like to invite everybody for our next IIP Talks with Jameson Webster, with the theme, what is psychosomatic between Freud, Winnicott, and Lacan. It will be on August the 5th, and there are the information posted in the chat. Thamy, it's such a pleasure. We could stay here talking the whole day, the whole weekend. Thank you so much. I will then invite Benoît to close this beautiful session. And again, thank you all the translations, and thank you everybody who attend today with this talk with you. Thamy, thank you so much.
Merci Yara, et merci beaucoup Thamy pour ces propos.
Thank you, Yara.
Merci à tous d'avoir été
Thank you, Thamy, for all your propositions today. Thank you to everyone who was here present today. And please follow us on social media and listen to our next IIP talk by Jamie Webster, who will be in New York in August. And also be a part of our next formation class so that you can listen more to Thamy and our wonderful professors. So thanks again to the translators. Thank you, Thamy.